The committee meets today to consider the expiring Provisions Improvement, Reform, and Efficiency Act of 2014. We're also going to consider an additional bill making technical corrections and clearing away so-called deadwood in the tax code. Finally, we're going to consider committee organizational changes. Now we'll have opening statements. For the next 13 days, millions of Americans are going to be searching for receipts, wading through a blizzard of forms, and parking themselves for hours in front of their computers doing their taxes. Instead of enjoying spring and the opening days of baseball season, millions of Americans are required by their government to do their tax math twice just to see if they're affected by the alternative minimum tax. And too often, when our neighbors turn to tax preparers for help, they fall victim to incompetent or predatory work that opens them up to a grueling audit. Complying with the staggering complexity of our tax code is now the fodder of nightmares for Americans across the country. The very fact that the committee is marking up the EXPIRE Act today shows the urgency of tax reform. Now, I understand why Americans who might flip on C-SPAN and watch this proceeding are skeptical about the prospects of real improvement. There have been loads of promises in the past of tax reform. When I joined the Finance Committee nearly a decade ago, I couldn't possibly have imagined chairing Congress's 15th time renewing the stop-and-go tax cuts called extenders. Many of these extenders are well-intentioned and ought to be permanent. Their stop-and-go nature obviously contributes to the lack of certainty and predictability that America needs to create more family wage jobs. It doesn't have to be this way. One reason I'm convinced of that is I've spent 9 years of sweat equity with colleagues in both parties to construct the Senate's first bipartisan federal income tax reform plan in 30 years. Senators Begich and Coates have pitched in, as well as former Senator Gregg, who sat with me and worked on it nearly every week for 2 years. Once these extenders are settled, I look forward to talking with Senator Hatch and all our colleagues about their thoughts on tax reform and whether these bipartisan ideas can serve as a basis for comprehensive reform. I know that every member of the Finance Committee would rather be marking up a broad-based plan to grow our entire economy rather than taking this piecemeal approach. Now that everybody knows what a tax extender is, and that it's possible for Democrats and Republicans to share some ideas on reform, I want to be straightforward on one point. This will be the last tax extenders bill the committee takes up as long as I am the chairman. That's why the bill is called the EXPIRE Act. It is meant to expire. Now, with respect to this morning, I'm sure some Americans paying attention are going to ask, if the complexity of the current system makes no sense, and it would be smarter to reform comprehensively rather than pass extenders, why is the Finance Committee working on this today? First, having been chairman of the Finance Committee for exactly 19 working days, constituents and colleagues tell us they don't envision a comprehensive reform bill passing before November. So in the absence of needed long-term reforms, here's what happens if the Congress just drops extenders now. The tax credit that helps returning veterans find good-paying jobs would expire, and more of our veterans would fall into poverty. The biggest federal incentive for scientific research would vanish. That would make it tougher for entrepreneurs across the country and entrepreneurs in Portland and Eugene and Corvallis and across the nation to turn their ideas into thriving businesses. Homeowners fortunate enough to have their mortgages lowered or forgiven could get hit with a huge unexpected tax bill. That could be as many as 28,000 people in my home state. Without the new markets tax credit, communities mired in poverty would lose a proven tool to draw investments and good jobs. Clean energy would take a blow, threatening good American jobs and our ability to compete on technology with countries like China and Japan. And families paying for college would lose a $4,000 deduction, which 28,000 Oregon families use each year to help cover the cost of tuition. Without fresh, comprehensive reform to put in place, it makes no sense to argue these incentives ought to disappear for good right now. Jobs, innovation, and research in people's homes are on the line. Second, passing the bill soon and making it the final extension puts an expiration date on the status quo. And it builds a bridge to comprehensive tax reform and gives our people 2 years of certainty about their tax bills. Stretching the debate out over several more months only leaves our taxpayers in limbo and has them waste more time and money trying to plan for what's ahead. Third, simply dropping worthwhile tax incentives now doesn't get Congress any closer to comprehensive tax reform. It sacrifices valuable priorities without getting the real job of comprehensive reform done. So I would say to colleagues on both sides of the aisle, let us pass this bill today and then put a lens to each of these provisions before deciding which ones deserve a permanent spot in a 21st century tax code. That task is going to be harder if these incentives disappear now. Ambassador Baucus, who's going to do an outstanding job in China, teamed up with Senator Hatch and built a strong foundation for comprehensive reform. They held an extensive series of hearings and put out option papers, and the majority staff published several discussion drafts. The draft on energy had a number of good ideas for how to move from stop-and-go policies to smart, integral parts of the tax code. Chairman Camp, who will be much missed when he retires at the end of this Congress, has worked hard in the House and introduced a comprehensive bill. All have offered some fresh, innovative ideas, and it's a safe bet that when the next comprehensive reform becomes law, it is going to draw extensively from their proposals. This spring, I'm going to start holding hearings on fixing the broken tax code and building a new system that works in today's global digital economy. On Tuesday, we're going to have a hearing on how to protect taxpayers from incompetent and fraudulent preparers. Now, there are other issues like identity theft and taxpayers' rights that we'll have to examine. Senators Nelson and Cardin have put a lot of time and effort into solving these challenges. And this committee will also need to take a hard look at the issues surrounding multi-employer pension plans in order to protect Americans' hard-earned benefits. This bill takes a first step, and I intend to work with my colleagues to do more. But today, we've got to balance short-term needs with long-term goals, and the bill before us today does that. Senator Hatch and I agreed to start trimming, to start reconfiguring the overgrown web of extenders. After President Reagan signed the 1986 Tax Reform Act into law, there were only 14 provisions that carried expiration dates. So we have got a lot of heavy lifting to do to fix the tax code. So when the committee put this package together, we said no to some things, and we reformed some others. I hope we can all be on the same page today and be sparing with amendments. In closing, I would just like to thank Senator Hatch, who has been so cooperative with me on this and other matters. As Senator Hatch and I have said a number of times, this committee has always been run in a bipartisan fashion, and I know on our watch we're going to continue to do that.